Hello, everyone. Welcome to the CREX and Kansas webinar series on researching the far right, methods and ethics. So my name is Audrey Gagnon, and I am a professor at the School of Political Studies at the University of Ottawa in Canada. I am also affiliated with the Center for Research on Extremism and the Canadian Network for Research on Security, Extremism and Society. So for those who are joining us for the first time, this webinar series aims to facilitate a discussion on the ethical, methodological, political, personal, practical, and professional challenges involved in researching violent extremism and terrorism. So these webinars are offered on the third Thursdays of every month. For today's webinar, we are very happy to host Stephane Baele and Lewys Brace. So Stephane Baele is a professor of international studies at the Catholic University of Lewys, so in Belgium, and an honorary associate professor of security and political violence at the University of Exeter. He has written extensively on violent extremist actors' communications from diverse theoretical and methodological perspective, working on empirical cases, including far-right image boards, incel digital communities, and neo-Nazi propaganda. Lewys Brace is a senior lecturer in computational social science, program coordinator of the Master in Security and Data Science, and co-director of the University of Exeter's Center for Computational Social Science, where he specializes in data science, extremism, terrorism, cybercrime, and open source intelligence. So in their talk, Stephane and Lewys will discuss the use of artificial intelligence by extremist actors and will reflect on the best way to apprehend them scientifically. So not only from a methodological point of view, but also from a broader historical, political, and ethical perspective. So they will present during approximately 25 minutes, and then we will have a Q&A session. So if you have any question at any time, feel free to write them down using the Q&A button, so below the screen, and they will be addressed at the end of the webinar. So Stephane, Lewys, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, and thank you very much for the invitation to attend and take part and present at the seminar series. Yes, this is a very big topic. Potentially we can cover loads and loads of different dimensions, and this is why with Lewys we didn't really know what to focus on, and so we chose rather to try to stimulate a discussion with the audience around five what we call considerations. So five thoughts that we had that we thought it would be useful to share with you as a starting point for debate. So I've got a slide in which I will present the considerations. And each of these considerations, each of them, it has a series of implications for our research, the way we conduct research, the way we think about the ethics of our research and our methods. So we have five considerations, and then there are implications for our everyday research. The way we're going to do this, I'm going to present perhaps as quickly as possible, really, so that we have time for discussion. I'm going to present, and then Lewys is going to take the lead on the discussion. He's just right off his class, and so he needs a little bit of time to get back to his feet. So I'm going to present, and he's going to get back on the lead for the Q&A. So I'm going to share the screen, and off we go. Hopefully it works. Right, can you see that? Can someone tell me if you see the slides?
Yes, we can see them.
Okay, perfect, because I can't see anyone. So if it doesn't work, just give a shout. Right. So the background, you all know it. It's the exponential growth in the power of and the complexity of AI systems. Of course, AI systems and models have been there since the 50s. But as you can see, and this is an exponential graph, it has really started its exponential growth in the late 2010. And we see more and more models that, as you can see in the graph from Our World in Data, very useful. These models are used in robotics and speech, medicine, language, and so on and so forth. And some of these models are actually pertinent, and they have an impact on extremism and terrorism. And this is what we are going to talk about today. But it's useful to have in context as a reminder that we see a proliferation of the different kinds of models, the way they are organized, their increased sophistication, the computing power that is needed to run them increasing, and so on. The 5 considerations that we're going to list is that first, you have some extremists who use AI, right? The second one is that extremists use it, but sometimes they don't, or they don't use it the way we would think perhaps they would use it. The third is we as researchers use it, and sometimes we don't, and we should not sometimes. The fourth is that extremists sometimes read your work, and sometimes they even read your work when you're using AI, and this has, of course, implications. And 5, you have to be reminded that the AI it's clear, but it's a technology, but I emphasize the it's a technology among many others, and we have to appraise it as a technology, not just something brand new that comes out of the blue. So each consideration, as I said, has an implication for our research practices and our ethics. In a report that I wrote with Lewys, which is available at the Voxpol website, voxpol.eu, called AI Extremism, Technologies, Tactics and Actors, we tried, and that was already a couple of years ago, we tried to map and chart all the possible uses of the various AI models by extremist political actors. And of course, the uses that spring to mind very quickly is the use of one particular type of AI, which are generative models, generating images, videos, voice, text. And this can be used to, for example, for broadly 2 tasks: to access information and know-how, or to create content. Here you see all the variations of content creation and the goals of what you can do by creating AI content if you're an extremist, or access information. But I'm not going to go through all of them. You can see the detail in the publication, but just 2 of them. The first one is speech recognition and translation. This is know-how that you can access through Gen AI. And this, just to give you an example, here you see a research brief, I think it's on GNet, where you can see that IS propaganda is using speech recognition and AI-based translation to generate and to translate their videos and their messages online in a whole range of languages, which was before that very difficult to do because you always had to find someone who spoke the language. As in in 2014-15 ISIS propaganda, they really had to rely on native speakers to translate and to generate these magazines and voices, which is not the case anymore. It's just to use an AI model, and you can translate and automatically in another language. The second one is, of course, the fact that you can generate propaganda, visual propaganda, like the 3 examples we give in the report. 3 examples among many of images that were generated during the Dublin riots, organized by far-right channels online. Another example here below, I don't know if you know the story, but here we have a tech influencer who, and we'll see later on how he did this, but he generated with a variation of OpenAI GPT-3, he generated a lot of racist content that he then injected en masse to the 4chan poll forum image board. And so he was able to really flood the forum with more racist content. And so the forum looked like it hosted, hundreds and hundreds of people in addition to what they usually had. So just these examples of, extremist uses of generative models, but you have many more, and we can address that in the Q&A if you want. But we should also see that we should understand that you also have other types of models, that generative AI models, so models that are not used to generate content, but to find patterns and to recognize patterns in data, for example, or models that are created to take decisions and to enhance the strategic quality and tactical quality of decisions, so decision-making models. And so all these models, they are used every day around us, like in driverless cars or in medicine, and all of them have a potential dual use by extremists and terrorists. We can again unpack that more in the Q&A, but it's very important to understand that it's not, when we speak about extremists using AI, it's not just generative AI. You have a whole range of possibilities beyond Gen AI. What are the implications of this first consideration? The implications is that when we try to study how extremists and terrorists use AI, we should really attune and try to figure out and look at the diverse uses, not just of Gen AI, but of the plurality of AI models that exist and that surround us today. But also what kind of impact each of this specific use of a specific AI model, what's the impact of that on audiences? What's the impact of that, the broader impact on societies? What kind of communication within societies it creates? What kind of challenge to democracy it brings about? But also how, if these uses or this or that use actually change or not existing practices in extremist communication and action. So you have a whole range of questions that we suggest are not very, it's not very fruitful to just say that you have extremist AI and it has one specific impact on democracy or an impact on audiences. Rather, you really have to go into the granularity of the whole range of uses of very specific AI models and to attune to the very specific impact each has on different audiences, societies, and so on, rather than to claim that there is one use of AI by extremists that has one impact. The second one is that, yes, extremists use these models, but actually when you look around you, we would suggest that they don't use it really overwhelmingly yet. Maybe it's just a question of time, but in the report we explained that you actually have a lot of benefits for using generative models and other kind of models, but you also have risks. And then people are also sticking to what they do usually. And so here I take a screenshot of, like, I'm collecting with the PhD students all the images that we find on a range of far-right platforms. And we were curious to see, and we thought we'd see a lot of AI-generated images and visuals and videos, but actually we really find that it's only a tiny minority of the images. So the users on these platforms, now it varies from one platform to another, but they keep on using the same kind of old ways of generating images. So this is just one example to show that we should not assume that AI is, now that it's democratized, like everyone can use it, it's very easy to use, that it is going to be used overwhelmingly by all sorts of extremists. You have different groups that have their own motivations, and the risk-benefit equation is not the same for everyone. So you have to study in other words, the implication is that when you study uses of AI by extremists, you really should evaluate carefully the exact extent and real importance of these uses, right? And you should not assume that it's overwhelming or that it doesn't exist. You should really measure the exact extent, and you should identify why this exact extent and not more or less, and you should bring pertinent theories to explain this variation, right? Why do we see this variation across platforms or across users or across groups? Consideration 3, we use it, right, or not, right? So here is a paper that I wrote with Lewys and another colleague who was a postdoc in Exeter, Elahe Nazarian. And in this, we try to show the various ways through which computer vision, so AI, image recognition models, a whole range of them, can assist us in our research on extremism, especially tackling online extremism that has so much data, so many platforms, thousands and thousands of accounts and images, and how that can speed up the process and help us create categories, validate theories, and so on and so forth. So we definitely see that there is a very productive use of these models. Also LLMs for everything that's text, for example, or combined models for image and text. So there's definitely a very fruitful use that may enable us to gain a lot of time, to be more efficient. But also in the paper we show that there is definitely, it's not going to solve all our problems, and actually some of the older tools are perhaps better and more efficient, or more rigorous, or simply more simple. And we should always bear in mind Occam's razor, like to try and get the maximum result with the minimum with the simplest structure in terms of our methods. So the consideration is that they can be useful, these models, for our research, yet really we should not always go after the fad and the new thing by claiming that they are superb, but we really should always choose the right tool for the specific analysis that we have. And if the best tool that you can have for some specific content analysis, for example, is a dictionary-based or lexicon-based analysis with simple counts, well, so be it, right? You don't need to train a very complicated LLM to do this, if eventually this is not really what you need for the very specific question that you have. So you have a lot of data science tools that are probably actually more informative or useful for most of our tasks. Second thing, if you do choose to use LLMs and other AI models, you have to be very careful on two things: how it's trained and calibrated, right? And so how the training and calibration, if you know how it has been done, which is not always clear, how that then is going to orient and shape some of your results. But also, if you interact and use these models, where your own data goes when you use these models for your extremism research. And this is why some universities have now developed their own variations of LLMs or big AI models, so that your data stays within your university and does not go, who knows where, somewhere in the States, probably, or somewhere in China, to further fuel their model or to be used and checked. So be very careful that actually every time you interact with one of these big models, your data is captured. And in our research, you may not want that. Consideration 4, moving on, extremists. Sometimes it happens, they read your work. So sometimes we're happy to learn that some people actually read our work, but sometimes it's extremists. I'm just giving here a nice screenshot where you see myself, Lewys Brace, and a colleague of ours at Exeter, Travis Cohn. And this is from an episode where we were publishing some papers, like the Tarrant effect paper, and then a CREST policy brief called Mining the Chance. We were engaging a lot on the Chan boards already. This is back 2021. And then they were commenting our work and trying to see things. It's just a fun story, but to illustrate that, well, sometimes, and you never know when, they're going to pick up on your research and really go granular about it, right? Trying to see if, for example, Travis Cohn is not a fake name because it sounds a bit like Cohen, so probably he's a Jew, and so on and so forth. But the thing is, some of them are perhaps going to see your research and use it. And now this means that you have to be very careful about what you share, how you share your data, how you share and your publications, if they're open access or not, and and how you share your tools. So, for example, if you create a model, an LLM model that's calibrated to find, weapons, or to on images, or to analyze extremist language and detect far-right language, or something like that, be very careful how you share your tool. Especially, and here I'm going to criticize the sort of naive take on open access. If you go all open access, regardless of considerations such as research safety or implications of your research, you may end up with the story that I started telling you about recently, 2 minutes ago. You remember the tech influencer who trained an LLM. He created a version of the chat of it was not the chat GPT then, but GPT-3, and he flooded 4chan poll with racist comments. Well, actually, how did he train the that model? How did he create the what he calls his model? He trained it on an open access data set from a paper. The paper is here by Papasava and et al. They thought that it would be a good idea to put their paper and the data for the paper open access on arXiv. And what is the data? Well, the data is a scrape of 3.5 years of 4chan posts. Of course, this is golden for anyone who wants to train a racist chatbot, which is exactly what this person did. And then you had all these articles that were like, here you see on PC Mag, like, shocker, the bot was trained on 4chan chats. It's super offensive. Well, that's not, I mean, you should never do that, like put your entire data set of racist remarks and posts and forums and whatnot openly on the internet. Now, this data set is, not only is it still there, right? But since I looked at the statistics, it has been downloaded not once by this tech influencer, Yannick Kilcher, it has been downloaded 60,000 times, right? And the dataset has been saved on multiple mirror platforms, meaning that even if they get rid of their dataset now on arXiv, which I would really like them to do, still you will find it on a range of other websites, right? And what happened is that after Yannick Kilcher did it, a lot of people then downloaded the data and started training an LLM. So now you have a whole range of racist chatbots that originate in an academic research that was carelessly brought onto the internet. So this is just one example of one thing, how to share your data, how not to share your data. But the same can be said of your tools, your publications, your working papers, etc., etc. Finally, AI is a technology. Here is again, I like the website, Our World in Data, very good visualizations. And here, what they do is to simply show like the whole range of how new technologies actually snowball and allow other new technologies to emerge, right? And so they go from the invention of fire to CRISPR gene editing technology and artificial intelligence. Now, what we can see here is that artificial intelligence is one of all these technologies, and it really takes part in a chain of technological progress. Before it, of course, you had the computer, and then digitalization, the IT revolution, and so on and so forth. And so we should really see that as a technology that builds on previous ones. Now, this is, of course, very easy to know, and we all know that, but it has implications, because very often people try to study in our field extremist AI uses, as if, all right, we have this brand new thing, and let's try to evaluate the effects, right? Or let's try to see what it does, or how they use it, but without looking at how historically each new technology that has emerged, right, literally from fire to the printing press to the telephone to gunpowder, etc., has impacted extremism, political violence more broadly, including the state political violence and the consolidation of the state, power more generally, power in society, power internationally, who has power, who is able to coerce or not, because you have a very rich historical and theoretical literature on how new technologies impact extremism, political violence, and power. And so I really encourage you, when you try to assess and study AI extremism, to look back into this literature. Of course, you have some quite narrow stuff that has been done very good by Yannick Veilleux-Lepage and others on, and of course his book as well by Yannick Veilleux-Lepage on terrorist innovation. But you also have some works that are a bit more broader, like here is a good piece by Thomas Hegehammer back then on the war on terror and how new technologies has unlocked, increasing state power to respond to 911. But also you have historical books and frameworks like here Daniel Hidrick or Charles Tilly on how the state and actors have consolidated power by harnessing new technologies more generally, right? And so I think it's good to situate AI in a continuous trajectory of new technologies that have historically not consolidated extremists and terrorists, but actually consolidated the state and corporate actors. So really, I think instead of considering it as a totally novel thing, AI and extremists, I really encourage you to go back to the literature on terrorist innovation, but also new technologies and political violence and power more generally. Thank you for your attention. These are the 5 considerations. I hope it was useful, and as I said, we just wanted to share some thoughts, some considerations, and to leave more room for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephane, for this presentation. I think I really like the last point that you make, that we need to situate AI in this in the continuity of technological innovation. I think that this is a very good point to keep in mind. We will now open the Q&A session. So if you have any question, please use the Q&A button, and your question will be addressed very quickly. So you already have a few positive comment for you. So telling you that the presentation was wonderful, amazing, extra. I also received email while you were presenting saying that this is a good topic. I see that there is one, and that is Rice. If you can write your question instead in the Q&A button below the screen, that could be great. Maybe while we wait for people to think about their question and write them down, I can break the ice with one question that I had. You mentioned, Stephane, that there's benefits and risk of using AI for extremists, and I can imagine like all the benefits. I think you addressed them in the presentation, but I'm wondering about the risk from the point of view of extremist actors, not of researchers. What would be the risk for them to use AI?
Yeah, I mean, this is something we explain in our report, that the risks and the benefits, the equation is going to vary from one group to another and from one individual to another. So let's imagine a jihadist cleric who has built his reputation for the strength of his education in his Islamist education, and he wants to put forward his credentials as a legitimate, let's say, voice of true Islam. Yeah. Now, if he starts generating memos and pamphlets and doctrine with LLMs, and this is found, well, everything collapses, right? So he wants to remain in control of what he's saying, and he wants not to be seen as a fake, right? Whereas for some other people, it really doesn't matter, right? If you generate, automatically racist rants online, for many people, who cares, right? But some people might. This is one of the risks, which we call the legitimacy risk or issue. Yeah. So for some of them, it's important to be recognized as a legitimate thinker. In the far right sphere, you have you have very clearly some authors who consider themselves or present themselves as intellectuals. Now, if you start discovering that they have used AI LLMs to generate their books, that's not very good for them. So it depends on Lewys. Maybe you have other cases or
it's exactly that. And even on this more subcultural radicalization, right, where you just have a bunch of different people talking on forums and whatever, you kind of have a sort of pushback against sort of AI stuff being shared there as well. Like for anyone who's on normal subreddits, for example, if you get someone posting a lot of images that's just clear AI slop, we see pushback there from the community. And it's the same thing on some of these sort of more extreme online subcultures as well. Like no one wants whatever part of the internet you're in, whether it's something innocent like aviation or bird watching or whatever, or extremist stuff. No one really wants someone publishing and sending a lot of sort of AI stop stuff in. It's sort of, yeah, it doesn't feel like a legitimate interaction.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We have one question in the chat from Suzanne. So asking, do you have suggestions for how researchers should ethically disclose the use of AI in their research? Do you see norms developing in the field, whether when conducting research or if generating new materials for prevention?
I would say that very much depends on what you mean by AI. And so, if you're using AI to help you build code for, say, some kind of image classifier, then I think it's worthwhile mentioning that A, you use an LLM to help you generate the code. B, look into the sources that LLM used to generate the code and cite any packages that have been developed. Because the key thing to remember about LLMs, right? And I feel like this happens a lot sometimes. People treat it as a silver bullet, okay? But it's not. It's not a silver bullet. It's these things, they're not even able to generate novel knowledge. They are essentially fancy summarizing algorithms. They just go and see what's out there and they just summarize it. So, for example, when you use it to help you build code for, say, a computer model, it's not novelly developing that code. It's just taking what's out there and sort of summarizing it for you. And quite often what it will do is use packages that someone else has developed and just present the code that uses those packages. So if, say, yeah, you're doing some kind of image classification task, something like that, I think researchers have an obligation to mention that they use the LLM and which one. Actually look at the sources listed by the LLM they use to generate the answer and cite any packages that have been developed. Equally, if you, as another example, if you're using LLMs to, say, as the question asks, to develop some kind of CVE kind of guidance, I would actively advise against that. Because again, it's summarizing stuff that's already been published out there, right? Which in some cases might be fine. But if we look at some of the new forms of domestic extremism coming down the pipeline, it's different, right? It is different. And so you're going to need more novel human takes on that, and sort of relying on LLMs for that kind of stuff, I would actively advise against. Sorry, I sound like a grump when I talk about some of this stuff.
No, but we have to be careful to continue to give an illustration of what Lewys is saying. There was, over the past year or so, some of the questions people were asking to the big models, Gemini and ChatGPT. I forgot the third one. That's a study that I actually talk about here. That was conducted by people at the University of Brussels. They were asking questions on a range of themes related to Russia and the far right. Now, the questions seem to go a little bit off what you would think in terms of what we usually think us attending the seminar, right? About what to do, what's the biggest risk, how to evaluate the risks, and so on and so forth. Now, the researchers noticed that Russia has created hundreds and hundreds of websites that have only super small variations in the website name, but basically share exactly the same content. And so they forward some content initially produced on Telegram. And so they were like, what's the point of having these hundreds of websites with like 6-7 letters different on the name of the website that generates the same content? And we can see that almost no one is visiting these websites. It doesn't make sense. Like, who cares? No one. And yet they persist. Now, they linked that to the odd responses in the LLMs, because the LLMs are feeding from what they see on the web. And if they see repeated information that's like congruent, which is the case, well, it's going to give you that information. And since then, I mean, this is a couple of months ago, but since then I've read other articles that people have been able to play the LLM by claiming that, you know, they were the world, like recently in The Guardian or BBC, the guy set up a series of websites to claim that he was the world champion for hot dog eating. And then when people ask who's the world champion for hot dog eating on ChatGPT, well, the chat gives their name. So just that's one example of we should be careful using that to generate, but we all know that.
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize, like I said, it's not the silver bullet everyone thinks it is. And you touched upon this a little in your presentation, Steph. Like, I think it's also worth bearing in mind there are a whole bunch of emerging technologies out there that have potential uses by extremists and so on. I think AI gets a large amount of focus because AI has been, in recent years, the most transformative technology in everyone's day-to-day life because it has such a broad set of usages, right? But yeah, it is just one emerging form of technology. It is still changing, but yeah, it's not a silver bullet. And that kind of links in a little bit with sort of us using it for research and the previous question, right? Like, when we think about how we use this in our research and how extremists might use it, I think we really have to break down and look at not this blanket umbrella term of AI, but the different specific types of models. And we discussed this in the report, right? I've been sat around tables where someone has said, well, extremists are going to use AI for this. And someone else said extremists are going to use AI for that. And the convener's kind of gone, well, how can it do both these things? And the answer is because they're talking about two very different models. Okay, one's talking about a pattern recognizing model, one is talking about a generative AI model. So yeah, we kind of need to factor all these things in when we're both analyzing extremist use of it and how we as researchers would use it. And again, I'm sorry for sounding grumpy.
Thank you. That's very interesting. We have another question in the Q&A. So a question from Kelly asking, for AI translation of extremist recruitment materials, do you see them checking their work at all? I know it can be hard to find translators, but AI translation is notoriously atrocious, so especially for anything nuanced. So an indication that they are tracking how the videos are landing, even as a metric or of whether the AI got it right.
I don't know. I haven't explicitly looked at that. Have you, Stephane?
No, but that's to me is a very good example of a good focused research question that, you know, specific use, specific study on the effects and how they observe whether or not it's efficient or not, whether or not it's bad or not. What I've seen, I mean, again, this specific part is not what I focus on most, but the specific use of a specific type of model is not what I focus on most. But I see that the instantaneous translation, from what I see, is very good, and so I would not necessarily share the fact that it's atrocious. In what I've seen people talking with, and I couldn't. It was very hard to notice that this was not the language they were actually speaking when they spoke, but that with a microsecond it was translated. I think you have a whole range of cases that are not within the extremist research that can show that. But then how do they harness that? How they use it? How do they check it's useful or not? I'm not sure about that. Sorry.
Right, we still have time for questions. So if you have any question, it can be about a specific research project that you're doing at the moment. Just don't hesitate. So I'm going to move to the next question in the meantime. So a question by Kat Tebaldi. So asking, well, first, thank you for this very clear and informative presentation. I wonder if you think the tech Broly-Gorshey's ideology, example, Test Creole, Mosque Corp, etc., being we're Nazi nerds, may influence how this is taken up by extremists.
So I'm trying to formulate a good answer to that. I think I think it depends. I think there can be a tipping point to it. I think there's a certain point whereby some extremists might use some of this stuff, but I think there's a tipping point when even extremists realize it's kind of unreliable, right? So look at some of the stuff going on with X now, right? It seems to be increasingly bots, fewer people, with the associated chatbot, the Grok kind of stuff. Like, yes, people are clearly still using it, but they've clearly altered the weights in such a way that this current suspicion is that it's being trained on a lot of stuff that is being posted on Twitter or X, whatever. And so it is becoming increasingly unreliable. My concern with that is that there's certain people who are perhaps hyper online, have some other issues going on, sort of typical extremist case we might think of, who are on parts of the internet where they're sort of engaging with racist, misogynistic, homophobic, whatever ideas, and they start to talk with bots kind of like Grok that just reinforce those views. So we've seen numerous cases over the last year or two where Grok has made incredibly sort of misogynistic statements about certain women, that racist comments about other types of people, and so on. And we do know that these chatbots can influence certain people to a degree. So, for example, I'm not sure if anyone saw this, but a couple of years ago, we had a case where someone tried to climb over the walls of Windsor Castle with a crossbow to kill the Queen. And he did that because he was talking to a chatbot that was customized to sound like the dragon lady from Game of Thrones. And that chatbot told him this was a good idea. And told him that, there was issues with the monarchy for that reason. So we do know people are susceptible to it. We also know there's psychological studies outside of the extremist case where young people and some older demographics can be influenced by these chatbots. So I think, if you are already perhaps vulnerable to some of its extremist content, then some of these more extreme chatbots like Grok or so on could push you further in that direction, absolutely. I think for people who are maybe having some extreme ideas, but it's sort of the moderate extremists, I know how paradoxical that sounds, could perhaps be sort of pushed away from that for a little bit based on how unreliable it is. Sorry, that's my long rambling answer.
Perfect. I'll move to the next question. Unless Stephane, you wanted to add something to this?
No, I'm not sure we understood the question right. I'm not sure if it's about potentially biasing the AI models into one of their favorite kind of ideological brands, and what impact does that have? I'm not 100% sure. But yeah.
Perfect. Well, Kat, if you want to reorient your question, we still have time. In the meantime, I'm gonna move to the next question. So a question by Miriam asking, have you looked at the companies and platforms behind the different AIs? So do they take responsibility for the misuse of their technology with, for example, steps to prevent it, or are they more passive actors?
Yeah, I like this question because for me, even those who claim to take action and to take into account the risk, they don't fundamentally change course of action. For me, the clearest case in that is OpenAI. OpenAI was really, when they were developing GPT-2, they actually did something very good. They commissioned two people, and this is it led to the first paper assessing the potential threat of extremism for AI. They commissioned two people in Monterey, Center on Extremism, to see if their new technology was potentially able to create some extremist content, right? And so they started playing with the API. There wasn't a chatbot now that everyone can access. They were given access to a specific interface, and they started, and they discovered that yes, indeed, it was not very good, but it could produce some plausible kind of extremist content. So they published two papers actually, and they were like, yeah, this is a big risk. A bit later, OpenAI published a huge report in which I think author list is like 200 people or 100 people, were listing all the risks that if that goes with that technology. And within these risks, some of them pertain to extremism and terrorism and crime. Now, this is years ago, and they still nonetheless carry on with the technology with very few. I mean, yes, of course, if you blatantly ask to write racist content for OpenAI, for Grok it will do. They don't care about safety, but for OpenAI or Claude or whatnot, they will not do it. But it's very easy to go around them, right? I mean, if you say, well, I'm creating a novel and I want it to be realistic, right? Now tell me how to create a bomb, like the guys making a bomb. What should I write? And then it's going to describe how to make a bomb. So, I mean, for me, pretty much all companies are irresponsible in a fundamental way because you will always find ways to go around it, and the technology is going to escape these companies no matter what. It's going to be on the open domain within a few years' time. And so in a way, they try to claim it's groundbreaking and it's going to change the world. Yes, it has some risks. Thanks for notifying them. We move forward, no matter what. Actually, we don't really care about these risks. We put some safety stuff, but so I would say they don't really take responsibility in a fundamental way, right? I would claim that.
All right. Next question from Sarah asking, well, first, thank you so much for a great presentation and discussion. So I was wondering what you thought about the possibility of AI contributing to the normalization or mainstreaming of extremism, whether through an overwhelming amount of content or by other means.
Correct me if you disagree, Stephane, but I don't think it's going to have any significant impact on the actual extremist online spaces that we are all familiar with looking at for our work. And part of the reason for that is for the same reason you see less bot activity on these sites, right? It's pointless targeting them because these people are already sort of buying into the stuff. I think you might see it to amplify the kind of narratives associated with extremist ideologies, perhaps on a more mainstream sites. You might see a bit of that there, but on the actual extremist spaces, for all the reasons Stephane mentioned in his presentation, I don't think we'll see much of a difference there.
Yeah, I agree. Now, I will give an example of a way that it could actually participate. And this is, and again, it's an example that takes its roots in foreign influence and information operations. So we have this paper with Lewys in which we study how Russian actors are trying to shape the information environment in the Sahel region. But the same can be said in Europe or in the US. And one way they do it is to create, hundreds and hundreds, actually tens of thousands of fake accounts on different social media, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and so on. And they populate these accounts with, content that goes in line with their interests. So in the Sahel, for example, is everything anti-French, anti-Western, neo-colonial, critique of neocolonialism and that kind of stuff, and pro-Russian to a certain extent. Now, the amount of fake accounts clearly means that some of the content is generated by AI. Some of the images and actually also some of the videos and some of the people that feature are fake and AI generated. And so what this creates is an information environment in which it becomes very hard to see what's real, what's not. Everything seems to be connected. Part of this information is going to be picked up by newspapers, people sharing content, and so it enters the mainstream that way. So if you flood an information environment with thousands and thousands of accounts, And to a certain extent, one way to foresee this, the problem with that, is to go back to the Russian information operations during the Trump campaign that was described in the Mueller report. And you can imagine how you could multiply that by a factor of 100 or 1,000 by adding AI-generated content.
All right, another question now from Boomin asking, well, first, thank you, Stephane and Lewys. So you mentioned choosing the right tool when using LLMs or AI to study extremist content. So do you have any suggestion for any red flag that researchers should look for, or requirements that researchers should look for when choosing their tools?
I mean, firstly, I would make sure if you're going to ask it to analyze a bunch of extremist propaganda, I would make sure it's not a public AI model. So it's one of the closed institutional-based ones that Stephane mentioned in his presentation. I personally, if I'm using some kind of machine learning or data science technique on our data, I prefer, where possible, to run it all locally to avoid that issue. But then I have the added benefit of being in a university where I have access to a high performance cluster and some machines if I need it. But yeah, I would firstly make sure of that. Secondly, it kind of depends on, again, which kind of AI or machine learning model you're trying to do. So if you're, using an LM to, say, analyze a bunch of text data, you've got one set of issues. If you're asking it to sort of, again, if you're using some kind of image classifier to analyze a bunch of images, you've got a different bunch. Yeah, can you specify a bit more about which kind of models or what kind of work you're doing? I can help a bit more with that. Yeah, just while we're waiting for the follow-up, I can talk for a bit, but yeah, it's yeah, I need to know what kind of work they're doing, then I can offer a bit more of a nuanced answer.
Perfect. Let's wait a little bit for Booming to specify. But in the meantime, we have another comment from ID saying, well, I'm not the person who asked, but I would like to know about using LLM to analyze text in natural language.
You've asked you've asked a grumpy person who's been talking about AI all day to answer this one. Look, it's useful. Like I said, these LLMs are essentially just summary algorithms. So they're pretty good at summarizing the kind of text being used. And it might be useful to provide you if you're looking at, say, an online subculture that's novel and new. So if we go back to like a few years ago when the Intel stuff really first came onto the scene and we had no understanding what these guys are talking about and it all seemed very, very weird. Then if you've got a large amount of their data, it could be a good way to sort of do an initial exploration to try to understand what the narratives are and what they're talking about. Again, as long as you don't do it on a public server. I think the important thing to note is that these LLMs, because they just summarize information, it would struggle to give you the kind of in-depth analysis you'd really need to do some of the more sort of analytical questions. So sort of comparing different online spaces, how are they linked together? What's the kind of ecosystems they're part of? Are there various sort of, it would struggle with sort of quantitative evaluations of differences in speech between different online spaces and that kind of stuff. That's where you really sort of need to engage with other data science methods and sort of think up and find specific algorithms and tools that are a bit more suitable for purpose. So like Stephane and I recently, we sort of were working on a paper where we sort of developed this idea of a social semantic network, which we kind of built upon previous work. And we sort of used that as a way to sort of explore how semantically different extremist online sites can be perhaps similar or more different based around certain topics. It's often through the use are those kind of tools that we gain much more useful insights.
All right, we have an answer from Kat now saying from the previous question. So saying that the question goes to the newest or unique import of AI in extremist content. So she wondered what effect the fact that this is created by people one might see as having extremist views themselves. And then Brock is a good example. So thank you for the answer. Okay, going back to the new question now from Bomin. So they are evaluating different LLM models in their ability to distinguish violent from non-violent users and real from false information. So using disinformation and far-right extremist posts.
Yeah, so the LLM is typically going to have I mean, this is a classifier basically that they're trying to build, right? And so the LLM is supposed to have a much more contextual ability to classify rather than a kind of rules-based classifier that you would do with a dictionary that you flag a series of words as typical of violent extremists or disinformation, whereas the LLM is typically, I mean, should be much better because it would allow the classifier to work through a broader understanding and appreciation of typical language patterns that you don't necessarily see if you have a classic NLP based classifier. So this is why this is why the big companies have turned to LLMs to do this kind of hate speech detection and stuff like that. So it should be much better, and this is why many people do like what this person is doing, which is to try and compare and contrast the power of the different classifiers that go with different models. Yeah.
My initial thought on that is a much more sort of traditional boring stats question about sampling. And it depends on the two types of data you've got for the non-violent and the violent extremists, right? Like, fortunately, the number of people who are violent is quite small. So I'd argue that part of one of the things you want to look at is, and again, without knowing much more about your study, it's hard to say, but you'd want to look, the sampling that the LLM does on each still be swayed by this sort of size of the two different samples you've got, much like Stephane was saying about the Russian disinformation sites.
Yeah, and here we have, I mean, I guess the data set that they're using is the